All right. Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted, as always, to have Aiden Moore come back for his series on Practical Jung. Today, his guest is Becca Tarnas. Take it away, Aiden.
Awesome. All right, welcome to today's episode of Practical Jung. Today, we're going to be talking about the parallel red books between Carl Jung and Tolkien. And our expert guest today is Dr. Becca Tarnas. She's a graduate professor at California Institute of Integral Studies and at Pacifica Institute. She does her work around archetypal studies, and she also does counseling as an astrologer. She's also the editor of the Archetypal Astrology. I'm sorry, you'll have to tell me what that's called again.
It's called Archive, the Journal of Archetypal Cosmology.
Okay, and she's also the editor of Archive, a journal of archetypal astrology. So Becca, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh gosh, it was easy for me to do. I'm very intrigued by this parallel that you found. And I myself come more from the Jungian point of view, and so I'm familiar with Jung's Red Book, but it's fascinating that there's this parallel between Tolkien's Red Book as well. I imagine we'll get into the specifics between the two, but initially I would love to hear how you discovered these parallels and sort of what gripped you about the subject enough to write your thesis about it.
Well, I started off on the other pole with Tolkien, and Tolkien is best known as the author of the book, The Lord of the Rings. And I had been an avid explorer of the realm of Middle-earth since I was 9 years old. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was 13. The Hobbit was read to me when I was 9. And I just completely fell in love with this world that is our world, but also an enchanted expression of our world. And as Tolkien said, Middle-earth is our Earth, but in an imaginary time. And it felt deeply familiar to me as a child, as a teenager. It just felt like this is where I belong. And it was almost as though Middle-earth overlaid my experience of the everyday world as a teenager. And so I was just deeply saturated in the imagination in that way. And the important piece here is that in the story of The Lord of the Rings, this story is written down. It's written down in a book that's called the Red Book of Westmarch. And this book starts off as the Hobbit Bilbo's diary, and then it's passed on to Frodo, and then finally to Sam. And they tell the story of the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. And there are supposed to be these appendices that Bilbo writes that are actually based on Tolkien's older tales that have been published in the Silmarillion. So essentially, the whole of the Middle-earth legendarium, Tolkien's stories of Middle-earth, have been, within the context of the story, written down in this manuscript, the Red Book of Westmarch, and then passed on generation to generation. And Tolkien is mirroring the medieval book tradition of naming a book after the color of its leather-bound covers, and then also the name of where this book is housed. So he's situating his story in this medieval book tradition. And so this was something that just was very deeply seated in my experience when actually this is even before I came to graduate school, I heard of the publication of Jung's Red Book in 2009, and actually wasn't that familiar with Jung at the time. But had some understanding of who he was, that he was a very significant figure, and actually ended up buying a copy of the Red Book for my father as a gift, because I said, well, he's into Jung. So, but I felt the draw toward this book. And the first time I opened the massive pages of Jung's Red Book, I thought this feels like a book out of Middle-earth. The illustrations, the calligraphy, the red and black lettering, there was so much in it just immediately at that imagistic level that felt like it had come out of Tolkien's world. And I noted the parallel names, the Red Book and the Red Book. But other than that intuition, I just kind of sat with it for several years. And then when I was in graduate school, I realized I could study Tolkien and the philosophy of imagination in a graduate context. This was an extraordinarily redeeming realization that my deep passion could be brought into a more rigorous academic context. And it was in that space that I felt, I need to look into this. This intuition is here. They have the same names. And so I proposed a title to the professor who actually became my dissertation chair. I was like, I want to do some kind of study called The Red Book and the Red Book, the convergence of images. And so when I finally sat down and I read through Jung's Red Book, it was quite an initiation. And I think it's a lot of ways I was reading it through this Tolkienian lens. And because I had that overlay already, these parallels between the texts were just leaping off the page for me. And there are so many. It just completely blew me away. I put many of them in my dissertation, but even, some are so kind of subtle or nuanced that I just put the major themes and parallels into that text. So that's how it got started.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that it's just following your own sort of passion that led you to your passion for Middle Earth and Tolkien's world, and how that was able to translate into this academic context, which is not always the case, I would imagine. But something I wanted to catch right away is, there are these two parallel books, but like you said, Jung's Red Book was published in 2009, right? So it's almost like it wouldn't have been possible for them to have known about each other's books. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. I don't think Jung would have heard of Tolkien at all in his life. Tolkien's work didn't really become popular. In his children's book, The Hobbit, which was published in 1937, it reached a certain level of popularity, but the widespread fame that came with The Lord of the Rings didn't happen until the mid-60s. Jung had already passed away in 61. I do know that Tolkien later became aware of Jung. I don't think he in any way deeply studied him. If anything, he probably read The Psychology of the Unconscious, published in 1916 in English. But even, that's based on two notes that we have. It's actually probably far more likely he just knew about Jung through other members of the literary circle he was in, the Inklings. But that's all in the 30s, that's in the 40s. The parallels between the two of them actually begin in 1913, when Jung's Red Book period started in 1913. And at the time, Tolkien, who was younger, 17 years younger, he took this unusual turn. He was in university at Oxford, and he started to make this series of drawings that he housed in a book that he called the Book of Ishness. And these are extraordinary drawings. They're clearly just straight from the imagination. They often show fantastical landscapes. They're very symbolic. They have names like Beyond, or the Back of Beyond, or Silent, Enormous, and Immense, or Firelight Magic. There's one called Before that just leads down this dark, foreboding tunnel. And then another one called Afterwards that you can clearly tell there's a threshold been crossed. Or one called End of the World, where it shows this figure stepping off a cliff into this starry seascape. And it looks not like he's committing suicide off this cliff, but like he's stepping into this imaginal realm. And there's no explanation for these drawings. Tolkien, if he did write about them, then they're in diaries that we don't have access to, or that are written in Elvish. So translating them is challenging. But how curious that at the same moment in history, and there's no way they would have known about each other at this point, around 1913, right before the Great War starts, the First World War, that they're both having these, I would say, visionary experiences coming to them, through them. And I really see Tolkien's Book of Ishness as like the prologue to his stories of Middle-earth, because it was just within another year, 1914, that he wrote the first poem of Middle-earth, began writing the first of the great tales, as he called them, in 1915, 1916, which are the exact same years that Jung is writing down the fantasies that become the core of the Red Book itself.
Wow, that is a fascinating parallel.
Yeah.
And I have had the good fortune of watching a little bit of your presentation of your dissertation, the video, which, are you comfortable if I share that in the... Please. So people who are here or in the replay, they can go watch that. I'll add a link. And in that presentation, I noted something that's related to what you're saying now, which is there's these sort of parallel imaginal realms happening, it sounds like, in this sort of synchronistic timing where, and I didn't remember this, but Jung is entering into his relationship with his Jung book, with his Red Book, at the same time that Tolkien is going into his Red Book, which is quite fascinating. So how do you conceptualize this sort of emergent shared space between the two?
You know, at first I just thought, oh, my job is to document these parallels, and that's enough. I'm just going to track them, the parallels between the images, the storylines, the different figures who show up, you know, Philemon for Jung, Gandalf for Tolkien, and so forth. And then, of course, recognized, oh, I do need to understand, I need a theory here, and to really have a sense of what's going on. And from both of their descriptions, Jung's are more overt, because he's very curious about what is happening to him. He wants to understand the vision-making faculty. Tolkien is a little different. We have to glean from his letters and other, you know, his essays and so forth. He's much more encrypted in how he talks about things. So I always want to be careful of what Sonu Shamdasani, actually the editor of the Red Book, calls interprefaction, where we interpret as facts based on maybe limited evidence. But from everything that I can glean that Tolkien said and putting it together with what Jung said, it really does seem as though these two individuals were having visionary experiences, some arising spontaneously, some more, you know, co-creatively enacted, as we know from Jung's practice of active imagination, and that these visionary experiences were in a lot of ways a crossing into an imaginal realm, or what the Sufi scholar Henri Corbin, who was part of Jung's Uranus circle, called the mundus imaginalis, based on you know, the Sufi esoteric tradition, that there is this middle realm, this middle world that is not the physical world. It is not simply the realm of abstract thought, nor the spiritual realm. It is a place in between, a place of images, and that I would say it's co-creative in the sense that it is archetypally informed. So if we bring this into some Jungian language, it's informed by the archetypes of, say, the collective unconscious, but then also the individual experience of the person participating in that realm. And so what arises in the imaginal realm is this unique and yet archetypally themed, the blend of universal and particular, landscape, people, and the extraordinary thing, and I think this probably has to do with the parallel timing between Jung and Tolkien. They entered into this realm at the same moment in history, a moment in history that in their cultures was very disenchanted. really discounted the imagination as anything real. You know, we use all these terms when we talk about the imagination. Oh, it was just imaginary. It was only a dream. We have to downgrade it with these terms, merely, only, just, to bring that profound truth off of its powerful pedestal. So it's at the same kind of disenchanted moment in history that these two are initiated into a recognition that the imagination is real, that fantasy is real. And the thing that I found in studying this material is that our terminology, our language itself is lacking. We have these binaries between spirit and matter, between psyche and matter, or between imagination and reality, fantasy and the literal. We create all of these dichotomies. And what I found is those really started to blur, that we can no longer claim that imagination is not real. Now it's slippery and we have to be careful. And that's where the work that comes forward in, say, deep psychological work is so important. We learn how to own our projections and to understand what it is we're bringing to the table so we can better perceive what's coming towards us in those visionary states. That it's not all just us, but it's not all just archetypal too. And so that's something that, in terms of Jung's Red Book, I think the fantasies that he recorded in the Red Book, they're not just his own personal fantasies, but they're also not pure depictions of a universal without his own individual cultural inherited biases and perspectives and so on. We really have to try and hold both. And again, that's why I think it's a middle realm, a middle earth, because it's in that in-between place.
Yeah, I love how you bring it back even to the word itself, Middle Earth. It's this middle place between the universal and the particular, perhaps, and where they live together. Mm-hmm. I love this idea of imagination as real but slippery, and bringing the Jungian terms into it, the archetypal, right, versus the sort of personal, and how they live together. We've had a guest join us, Dr. Muriel Mann, apologies, who studies fairy tales and as a way of getting to that archetypal layer of the psyche in the form of fairy tales. It's the goal being to get away from the particulars and into the archetypal, which she posits is fairy tales are sort of the best platform for that, so to speak. But you said so much good stuff. One thing I wanted to catch was that they were both visionaries, right? Jung and Tolkien, at this disenchanted time, having these visionary experiences. And me coming from the Jungian orientation primarily, what I find fascinating about that, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is there is a little bit of a differentiation between a visionary artist and somebody with a psychological orientation, so to speak. So Jung, for example, having this quote unquote visionary experience, but kind of trying to say, what do these images embody about my own psyche? What are they the personifications of about me? In the same way that we might have dreams, that personify complexes or parts of our own psyche. So it's almost like the imagination is an entry point to that. And so the psychological side would be, what does this say about me? Whether it's on the archetypal or the personal level, it's sort of what is going on inside of me to have these dramas and these images. Yeah. And then there's also, he makes the distinction, the visionary artist who takes that material and runs with it, so to speak, expresses it, puts it out into the world as a craft, as a creative expression. Yeah. So I wonder, is there a distinction there between Jung and Tolkien, where is Tolkien approaching it more from a visionary artist standpoint? Or, you know what I'm saying? I'm curious about this distinction.
I certainly do think there is a distinction, and that's one of the really beautiful things actually about looking at the parallels, is it's when we look at the differences that the parallels can really shine. And it's true that Tolkien, he did approach it more in the sense of a visionary artist, because he would speak about his stories would arise in his mind as given things. And then he would take what arose in his mind and he would write it, and then he would rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. And so I always think of his process as, and he describes this in his philosophy of imagination, which he calls subcreation, that essentially images arise through the imagination. That's the visionary part. And then we shape them through art with a capital A. And so it's that sculpting process that makes these kind of imaginal nuggets into a fully coherent story. And so if we go back, which we can do, and read Tolkien's drafts of The Lord of the Rings or his earlier tales, you see how they evolve and change. He was a master of his craft and of language and choosing just the right word. But my sense is that it's to honor the original vision. Even if certain things change, there are core images that were there right from the beginning. And that he even talks about whether it's certain words or figures or even, as story elements, they're there from the beginning and they never go away. He keeps writing about the same thing over and over again. And that, one example that I love from childhood, Tolkien was haunted by this dream of a great wave that rolled in over the land, and he would wake up just gasping for breath, terrified. Since childhood, he had this dream again and again. And finally, in the mid-30s, he wrote it down, starting in a tale called The Lost Road. It found its way into the Notion Club papers, which was another separate tale. But in the end, like everything else Tolkien was working on, it ended up in the Middle-earth mythology. And he actually said he had to write about it again and again until it was finally exorcised. And then he later learned that he passed this dream onto one of his children, who also had the dream. Now, for those familiar with Jung's experience and biography, this dream is very similar to the Great Flood vision that Jung had October 17th, 1913, on a train journey that initiated his whole Red Book period, this flood coming in over the land and inundating Europe. And so for Jung, he thought at the time, this is the unleashing of a latent psychosis. Perhaps I'm going insane. And he was very afraid of that. And he made the very brave choice to stay with the material, to engage in active imagination, to keep pulling forward the visions and documenting all of it. But it really was quite a terrifying period, especially when you hear about it reflected on by his children. He was sleeping with a gun by his bed. He was having dreams where he was saying, if I can't understand this, I have to shoot myself. And he was in that state for 9 months, a perfect gestation period. And then the Great War broke out at July 28th, 1914. And he realized there was a connection between his inner experience and the events of the outer world. And so what I think that indicates is, yes, these visions say something about the individual having them, but also we are receivers of something beyond us. And that what was so significant for Jung was that his visions weren't only personal. Now, there was plenty of personal material for him to learn there, for sure. But it was also reflective of the larger collective situation. And it was that realization of the link between inner and outer, what he would later come to call a synchronicity, that he realized, I can't just keep these as private visions in my journals. I have to study them. I have to understand where they're coming from. And that's when he commissioned the Red Book, the actual beautiful manuscript bound in red leather, reworked the manuscript, just like Tolkien does, reworking the text, and then finally writing it out. And there's some debate about, is this something that he wanted to keep private because it was kept private until 2009? Was it something that he wanted published? I think the initial intention was to create a document that could be published. It's addressed outwardly in many places. He writes, to my friends and so forth. But I think he reached the point in the 1920s where he realized that it wouldn't be understood. So the initial intention was it was meant to be public, the Red Book. But he finally came to the place of feeling like this won't be understood. And I do think there's probably some truth in that. Jung really pushed the edge of what people would accept in his work. But I think the fact that it finally has been published, and now even as of several months ago, we have the black books available too, the original journals where he wrote down those fantasies. I think finally the world is ready a century later to essentially to say, yes, visionary experience is real, and you can have visionary experiences without being insane. That's the revolutionary thing that Jung gifted us with. But I think it took beyond his lifetime for that fact to really be acceptable by a larger public.
Yeah, what a gift too, right? This idea that visionary experiences can be accessible to any of us in terms of getting in touch with the relationship between the inner and the outer, and what might even be called a spiritual experience. Do you think that's a valid conception?
Absolutely. Yeah, I very much feel that these visionary experiences that Jung was going through were profound, mystical, spiritual experiences. The split between psychology and spirituality doesn't need to be quite so differentiated as academic disciplines like to set them. And Jung is certainly an individual where those can intersect much more.
Yeah, and I would love to hear how you've taken this thought into your own work, and when you talk about counseling astrology that you do as well now, this place where spirituality and science don't have to be so disparate, right? I'm curious to hear how you kind of embody that in your work these days.
Well, yes, as you mentioned, the lot of the work that I do is as a counseling astrologer and as a teacher of astrology too. And astrology is a really extraordinary discipline because it brings together so many other fields, so many other disciplines, and holds them together. It makes us question, well, are these really separate? Because what astrology is, it's the study of correlations between the movements of the planets and the unfolding of events, human events on Earth. And that through study, we can recognize that these are legitimate correlations. We can look back through history and see repeated themes. So for example, when the planets Saturn and the planets Pluto come into alignment with each other, geometrical alignment, we see these correlations of time periods that are where there's major contraction and crisis and difficulty. So we look back through the last century or so, and we can see that both world wars started when there were Saturn-Pluto alignments, that the Vietnam War started when there was a Saturn-Pluto alignment, the Cold War started when there was a Saturn-Pluto alignment, 9/11 happened under a Saturn-Pluto alignment. Lo and behold, COVID-19 happened under a Saturn-Pluto alignment that we're in the last year of right now. Whether it's, wars and geopolitical conflict, or epidemics, pandemics, like the bubonic plague, if we want to go back 7 centuries, economic crises, Great Depression, Great Recession. Now what I'm calling the viral depression. We'll see how that continues to unfold. These are all correlated with alignments of these two planets. Now, that in itself is significant, that these periods line up in history with these specific alignments of these two planets. What's even more extraordinary is that the qualities that astrologers associate with these two planets, the archetypal qualities associated with Saturn, which is connected to structure, discipline, pain, suffering, loss, hard work, contraction, constriction, imprisonment, difficulty. These are the archetypal qualities that have been associated with the planet Saturn since antiquity. Pluto, discovered in 1930, it's taken more time for astrologers over these last 80 years to come to an understanding of what the archetypal meaning is. But in the research of recognizing what Pluto is associated with, they've recognized that the archetype associated with this planetary body is related to the depths, to the underworld, to death and rebirth, to transformation, to the instincts, to the elemental powers of nature, transformation, transmutation. You bring these two archetypal principles together, and you have an intensified pressure cooker, this cauldron of the instincts that's being squeezed and compressed. And sure enough, those archetypal qualities are exactly what we see unfolding on Earth when those two planets come into alignment. So you have the level of the actual historical facts, you have the level of the physical planets in alignment, and then you have the archetypal theme running through both. And so that's what astrology is tracing. So you have to pay attention to the physical element, to astronomy. You have to pay attention to the human social element, to history, to sociology. And then also this mythic, archetypal, psychological stream. They're all woven together. And ultimately, the question we have to ask ourselves when we look at all of this is, what does it say about our cosmos that astrology works, that these correlations are real? It completely undermines the mechanistic, materialist, scientific paradigm that there is an interiority to the cosmos just beyond human subjectivity. And that is not only a profound physical insight and psychological insight, but also a spiritual insight. And so for me personally, to come back to your question, I don't see, like, my spirituality and my psychology are intimately interwoven, and they're interwoven with my ecology and my cosmology. They can't be separated out. So that was a long roundabout way to present what astrology is, but also how it fits in with these larger themes we've been discussing.
Yeah, it does though. And I love this example of Saturn and Pluto, right? And how the alignment between the two is in sync with these events that we've experienced, very violent events. Mm-hmm. And something I want to catch for our audience is something that we're really talking about here conceptually from Jungian framework is synchronicity. There's a bit of a thread going on here, right? Because we've taken it into astrology to say that the alignment of planets corresponds, right, with certain events on Earth. And Jung frames this, as I understand it, as this concept of synchronicity, which is to say meaningful coincidences, right? Whereas we live in a world of statistics and probability, science is quick, and this is an overgeneralization, so I apologize, but to say that something, if it goes into the realm of chance, and therefore it goes into the realm of meaninglessness, as opposed to saying, hey, these two things have come together at the same time, and it feels meaningful. So how do I take stock of that? How do I capture that? And I think it's fascinating, your examples with Saturn and Pluto. I didn't realize all of those events took place in such a way. And I wanted to just tie that back quickly also to the Red Books, where we say, it's a perfect thread there, because we say here's Tolkien and Jung, and in the same year they're having these visionary experiences that ultimately kind of wind up with the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And the tidal wave experience that Jung had, as it corresponds with, or the flood, I don't remember which one was a tidal wave and which one was a flood, but
Mm-hmm.
Jung and Tolkien had these synchronistic experiences. So it brings up a pronounced question in terms of the context of practical Jung, right? Where we say, how does a person take stock of synchronistic events, and are they real? Are they just these, low probability chance experiences that we want to just sort of do away with?
Mm-hmm.
And something I'd be curious, because of your work being so steeped in this world, I'd be curious for yourself, even, how do you, when something feels coincidental, almost like a chance occurrence, how do you manage to make the distinction between, this is just chance and it doesn't mean anything, versus, this is a very meaningful event?
It's a wonderful question. And, synchronicity is really the phenomenon that for Jung broke down his Kantian barrier, where he was seeing the archetypes and the collective unconscious and all of that is completely subjective and interior. Synchronicity breaks that, because there is that connection between the inner world and the outer. And I think that in our study of synchronicity, it's being able to find examples of publicly verifiable synchronicity is very significant. And that was one of the things that really drew me to exploring the parallels between Jung's and Tolkien's Red books, because it was a clearly demonstrable parallel, and that could be publicly verified by anybody. They can sit down, they can read Jung's Red Book, they can read Tolkien's work, and they can see the parallels right there in front of them. Astrology does that, I think, far more comprehensively and beautifully, in the sense that there are repeated themes. Something in my lineage of archetypal astrology that is said is that archetypal astrology isn't concretely predictive. We don't look toward the future and say, this is the specific concrete thing that will happen, but it's archetypally predictive, in the sense that you can speak to the archetypal themes that will unfold. And so astrologers looking forward to our current moment, knowing that there was this Saturn-Pluto conjunction coming in, could look back through history and say, it's going to be something of the level of one of the world wars or 9/11. Now, we don't know if it's going to be a terrorist attack or a war or an economic depression, but we do know it's going to be difficult. It's going to be divisive. It's going to bring a confrontation with the shadow and a confrontation with a sense maybe even of evil. The world will feel heavy, dark, consequential. And that here are the exact dates where we're going to be feeling that. 2018 to 2021. And so with astrology's ability to give forward those, the specific timing and the archetypal themes, it's a continuously ongoing synchronicity that is publicly verifiable. A personal synchronicity, you can't guarantee to repeat, but a synchronicity of the scale of what we see with astrology, that keeps going. And it's not just these two alignments of Saturn and Pluto, it's all of the planets in the solar system coming into different alignments with each other. And it's just such strong evidence that synchronicity is pointing to something deeper, and that there really is this archetypal causality. Like Jung talks about synchronicity as an acausal connecting principle. And that is an accurate term if your understanding of causality is one of material or efficient causation. But what astrology, what synchronicity allows us to do, it allows us to retrieve some of Aristotle, actually, his other forms of causality, of formative causality, of final causality. What's the teleology? What's the shape that we're moving toward? So it once again broadens our understanding to include an archetypal causality. So it's not the physical planets causing these events to unfold on Earth, but I would say that the archetypes are what are orchestrating the whole movement in synchronous harmony.
Yeah, I love that. I know Jung sort of touches on Taoism in his writings here and there, but there's a piece where he says, it's sort of like the Tao, things that like to go together. Eastern view that's quite different than ours, but it seems to be that things have these patterns outside of our sort of reductive or causal or ideological points of view. And what a fascinating talk. I just want to, as we're winding down, let our listeners know that you have a book that's forthcoming on the topic of the 2 red books. Did you want to speak about that at all?
Sure. So my dissertation, which is called The Back of Beyond, the Red Books of C.G. Jung and J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm in the process of, making the necessary revisions to be able to publish it as a book. So I don't have an exact timeline on that yet, but it's moved to the forefront of my priority list. And I'm really hoping to get that published at some point in the near future.
It's so exciting. We'll try to keep our listeners posted on that when that date comes. And for those interested, you can find Becca Tarnas at her website as well, which is it just your name?
It's just my name. Yeah, beccatarnas.com.
And she does astrology counseling if you're interested in exploring that further. And this has just been a wonderful conversation, Becca. Thanks for being with us.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you for such great questions too.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you, Aiden. So folks, now we go into breakout rooms to discuss everything that Becca has put on the table. We're going to do that for 20 minutes. And then we're going to come back here into the main room, and you get to share your takeaways from everything that you've heard during the presentation and your discussions in the breakout rooms, and ask questions to Becca and Aiden. All right, starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back.
I just want to talk to Shikran. I don't know, Aiden.
Slow down. You are the slide man. I know you did some good slides about it.
Wonderful. Folks, welcome back. Welcome back. So it's time for takeaways. We have 4 rules that have worked really well for us. Number 1, type an exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. All right. So you can either talk about just your takeaways. You can talk about just put your question, just one question per person though, maybe 2. Try to focus on just the most important question to you, because we want to get to as many people as possible. Okay. Or you can give both takeaways and questions. So it'll be JJ followed by David Bloom. JJ, go ahead.
Oh yeah, hi. Well, thank you. And basically, my takeaway was drawing distinctions between natural faith or religion and revealed and astrology. And the question I would have for Becca is if she is aware, or does she have any thoughts about this belief of a synchronization beam coming from the center of the galaxy that affects our consciousness, that affects events in this planet? Does you know anything about this?
I don't know specifically of that being located in the center of the galaxy. my intuition, I guess I would say, is that it speaks to synchronicity, archetypal patterning speaks to an interconnected universe where interiority and exteriority are dynamically interwoven with each other. But I wouldn't necessarily be able to say, oh, that's located in this specific place, or it's sourced in this specific place.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be David, Jade, and Betty. David, go ahead.
Becca. So I'm going to take credit. I'm the one who introduced you to Aiden, and I just thought you knocked it out of the park. I was just so impressed with your talk. So thank you for that. I had studied sort of Jung and Tolkien separately, but then when I came across your work, it just really, a lot of lights came on. Here's someone finding the parallels. So I think it's fantastic. I wanted to ask you a question because there's so much synchronicity and the similar time frames they were and the archetypes that they were channeling. I had found in my studies, I don't know if you have, the influence of Wagner at the time, who did Ring of the Nibelungen, and there's a lot of familiar archetypes in that operatic work that Tolkien will never admit to, but you could see there was a lot of influence. And then when you look at Jung, obviously Wagner's operas had a lot of influence on him as well. He wrote his Wotan essay. Wotan was a big character. Some would argue Sauron was sort of Tolkien's Wotan character. So it gave me a lot of interesting connecting fibers, sort of tracing back the Wagnerian dramatic myths to both Jung's work and Tolkien's work to sort of see where they were coming from similar places. So, as that, did you explore that realm, or, feel free to comment on it. I just was curious about what you thought about that.
There are definitely influences and parallels. You can see in Jung's Red Book, there are certain figures who show up that can be found in the Nibelungenlied, the Ring of the Nibelung. That is a deeper and older story in mythology than Wagner's telling of it. And I feel like it's important to see through Wagner to that deeper mythological lineage, especially because, there's a lot of problems with who Wagner was and how his worldview and his music even were used and applied in, say, Nazi Germany. So I feel like it's important to kind of move through Wagner into that deeper myth that informed him, but also has much more ancient cultural roots. And so the Nibelungenlied definitely does informs Wagner, informs Jung, I think, I don't want to quite say unconsciously, but comes through his unconscious, or the unconscious through him. Tolkien, as you mentioned, was very adamant against wanting there to be direct connections made to Wagner's ring cycle. He said both rings were round. Other than that, there are no similarities, which isn't technically true, but he was actually influenced by other tellings of the same myth that informed Wagner. And I think Tolkien would want that distinction made. Interestingly, one of the fairy tales that most informed Tolkien, which is the tale of Sigurd and Fafnir the dragon, that same hero, Sigurd, shows up as Siegfried for Jung in the Red Book. And that fairy tale was written down in a book by Andrew Lang called the Red Fairy Book, that influenced Tolkien. So it's just like, oh, there's another Red Book. And of course, they all have that story lineage behind them.
Wonderful. Next up is Jade, followed by Betty. Jade?
Sorry, I booted myself out of my group early by accident. Sometimes I get the controls wrong, but we were talking somewhat about the concept of dreams the mythical world, all those things being somewhat commonplace for, I don't know, for a very long time outside of the Western world. And on some level, I feel like the world is no longer such a huge mystery. There's always things even people who are in touch with the mythical don't understand, but the world isn't such a huge mystery when you're in touch with the mythical. When you have that relationship with that liminal space, because you just haven't created those, you haven't made, dichotomy probably is the wrong word, but you haven't decided that you need to compartmentalize every aspect of your being. You kind of would feel as though, you know, how Jung wanted to feel. Like he was conflicted partially because the world told him or implicated that what he was experiencing was wrong too. And so I was also bringing up, and someone was responding to it when I got booted myself out, was the fact that I think there's something to question here as to how we make each other question what we experience and what we feel. And what, because like him wondering if he was sane because he was having dreams. Like, I don't know the full scope of his dreams, but to me, that's something that's problematic because I could see a lot of people having that feeling. And then I think the last thing I'll put forth just for food for thought is that like there's nothing new under the sun. And I think one of the best places where I see synchronicity is in my Google searches, because like I'll have a novel idea, and I've, you know, I don't know that I've lived that long, but I've lived long enough to know that any novel idea that I come up with on my own probably isn't novel. Someone else has probably thought about it before I have, and even if I feel like I've come up with it in a vacuum. And Google searches are great for that. One simple, silly one is like floor chairs, because I spend a lot of time on the floor. I Google floor chair. Like, you know, there are probably more arbitrary examples that I could give, but lo and behold, there were things called floor chairs. So I did not think up the floor chair. And I think that is an important part of it. And I guess I missed the bicameral mind thing. But I think that lends to that is understanding that like, we're all given and have the ability to kind of see or perceive, whether it's something that we're experiencing. Again, that shared experience, even if it's someone 500 years ago, 500 years ago, after me, someone in another country, like they might actually see the same thing that I'm seeing when I'm experiencing. I don't know that I can articulate it very well, but they will see the same thing that I'm experiencing, even if we're not experiencing at the same time. And I think that's what people end up having support groups and things like that for, is because they want to, you want to find someone who has had that similar experience to you. And so it puts that synchronicity into words. So instead of the two of you having a red book, you two are like, yes, I had that same exact experience, but I don't know how. Like we had that same experience. I don't know if I explained that well, but hopefully the underlying concept is there.
I thought you explained it pretty well. Go ahead, Becca.
I think you explained that beautifully. And it's just so fascinating how that, you know, your statement, like there isn't anything new under the sun. When something seemingly novel does emerge, it's like it's being thought of or brought into form by multiple people at once. So we have, you know, two individuals, Darwin and Wallace, articulating the theory of evolution virtually simultaneously, or these two red books, or it's as though that's really where you can see, oh, there's something beyond individual human minds that are moving through us as a collective, and that synchronicity really does point to that deeper collective interconnection.
Interestingly about that, Becca, specifically, you probably heard about this, but in the Jungian framework, duplicity, you know, where he was as a medical practitioner, they had a joke, I forget where it was, I think where he was doing his residency, but if they got a case that came in that was very rare and they hadn't encountered in years or yet, and they would say, well, get ready to have it again tomorrow, because there's this sense of duplicity where one comes and then the other comes. So that's coming up for me when you talk about evolution or the Red Books even.
And the thing with synchronicity, I find that, you know, the more we pay attention to synchronicity, the more they appear. And now some people might say, oh, well, that's because you're looking for it, which could be true to a certain extent. That's where discernment is so important. But from the other angle, it's almost like the world knows you're listening now. So who's the world going to speak to? It's going to speak to someone who's listening and takes the world seriously.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is going to be Betty, followed by Stefan. Folks, if you want to share your takeaways or have questions, go ahead and type !in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Betty.
Thank you. Yeah, we thought it was interesting that most of the mind happens in the unconscious. And from that, I was just wondering, how do you explore your unconscious mind? And in particular, the shadow. How do you integrate the shadow?
Me personally, or one in general?
Yeah, in general, and things like the anima and the animus. How do you integrate these different parts of the self?
Well, it's a huge question. But all the extraordinary modalities that we have for doing deep inner work, whether that's in a therapeutic context, whether that's you know, working with practices such as active imagination, or tracking your dreams, or you know, working even with sacred medicines, holotropic breath work, there's so many different modalities for moving beyond the ego. And as we get to know these realms of the unconscious, then integrating that is, I mean, that's really where the work is, right? We can have the encounter, but it's being able to integrate it. It's being able to live that is actually the true work. And I don't think we can do that work alone. Ultimately, we need the guidance of a therapist, of partners, of family members. We have to do that in relationship, because we need the reflective mirroring of others. And we have to learn how not to project those parts of ourselves onto other people. So that's that practice of, well, know thyself. It can't be done in isolation. It has to be done in a relational container.
Thank you, Betty, for that question. The answer is very, very long indeed. So I would, we did a whole series of meetups where it was a panelist of Jungian analysts talking about each of these concepts, you know, individuation, self, anima, shadow. And so you will hear multiple takes. I've put the playlist in the chat. We can start from there. Next up is going to be Stefan. Stefan, go ahead.
Yes, hi Becca. So how does one better access this psychic realm that Jung and Tolkien got their ideas from?
Well, there are many avenues of access, and I think a large part of it is just simply a shift in terms of what one is open to. So now everyone has a bit of a different relationship to the imagination. For myself, it's very image-based, but for others, it may be more auditory. For others still, it might be more emotional or embodied. But whatever your kind of starting point is in relation to imagination, starting to lean into trusting that. I think that the practice of active imagination is extraordinary in the sense of holding an image in your conscious awareness. It could be an image from a dream. It could be an image that spontaneously arises. It even could be an image that you take from a painting or a tarot card. Hold that image in your conscious awareness. Stay with it. And then this is the nature of psyche. It will begin to move. And what Jung was doing was actively engaging with the images to the point that he could step across the threshold and participate in the drama. Now that's something that you can, now For some people, they can just kind of dive right into that. For others, it's much more helpful to do it in the context of working with, say, a Jungian therapist or a guide. There are other modalities that allow one to come into relationship with that as well. I mean, there are so many different shamanic lineages that allow one to cross into that realm, that, you know, we can look to pretty much every, almost every culture around the world to be able to find modalities and techniques to come into relationship with this other realm, this middle realm. But if we're sticking strictly with the Jungian, then active imagination is what he used. And that in itself has an ancient lineage that comes out of the alchemical tradition, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism. It's a very old practice that comes under a lot of different names.
Actually, if I could dovetail on that too quickly, because this is a very alive question for me, and I don't have like a solve all the, it's not an answer that solves all the answers, but essentially, I think the Jungian framework, as it ties into psychological functions from its like six collected works, would be to step out of the habitual responses to things. So in other words, if you want to go into that material, of course, there's going to be dreams, there's going to be intuitions, and staying with images and heat and art, you know, which he absolutely sort of prescribed. But there's also this other avenue of what's your habitual response to things. That's what he was talking about in the cognitive functions or psychological functions. You would say, how do you normally respond to a situation? Where's the strength response? And how can you quiet that and be with yourself without running away with your habitual responses to things? It's kind of a weird way of putting it, but if you can play with other parts of your psychology besides your strengths, you can suspend your strengths, then you can play with some other parts of your psychology. And that's kind of one way to, like I'm not very good with the sensation function. So activities where I have to slow down and be very structured and very present, it's very hard for me, but it gives me an experience of connecting with another layer of myself. Jung would say like the inferior function is colored by the unconscious. So you can reach a lot of the, or at least von Franz would say that, but you can encounter a lot of your unconscious colorings in your psychology through your inferior function. That's just another way to play with that.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Stephen Pritchard, Richard Owen, and Mike. Stephen, go ahead.
Hi, Becca. That was a wonderful talk, and we're looking forward to hosting you in Bristol in September. I just wanted to ask about these red books, because I read very recently. I love Tolkien, but I didn't really know much of the background behind his writing. So he took the title from the Red Book of Hergest or Hergest, which was in, and he found that funny to do that, but it's in the Jesus College Library in Oxford. And that book contains the Mabinogion and all those medieval Welsh fairy tales. Is that different to the book you were talking about with the dragon story, or is that a whole other layer of folk tales and fairy tales?
So you're totally right that he's making a reference to the Red Book of Hergest or Hergest, and that was the Mabinogion was a text that Tolkien was extremely familiar with. He has an annotated copy. He was underlining words that, you know, related to like the fairy realm, the underworld. He clearly had a fascination with that other realm. But his own, the Red Book of Westmarch is simply referring to now I understand what your question is. The Red Fairy Book by Andrew Lang is a different book. It's a different Red Book. And so, and what's in that one, the tale of Siegfried, it's a different, different legend, different mythological lineage. That one's more Germanic. The Mabinogion, as far as I understand, is coming out of, I guess
Welsh.
It's Welsh. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So different red books. There's a lot of red books out there. The more you get into it. I mean, even the very last story that Tolkien ever wrote, it's a short story called Smith of Wootton Major. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend all of you go. You can find it online. It'll take you half an afternoon to read. It's just gorgeous. It's about a man traveling to the realm of fairy. And it's considered, I would say it's semi-autobiographical. And he published that short story in Red Book magazine. Last thing he ever published. And it's like, of course it ended up there.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Next up is Richard. Richard, go ahead.
Hi, Shrikant.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
We've got a big team from Europe calling in today. So welcome. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks, Becca, for your talk. And it got me thinking about John Beebe's writing about the Red Book in his Energies and Patterns book. He gives a sort of bit of a breakdown of it. And one of the characters, interestingly, the red one, he talks about the red one and he talks about the different archetypal natures. And he sort of, I think he puts that as being the trickster kind of archetype. And that's one of my favorite archetypes in any sort of myths, legends, films, whatever it might be. It's just always fascinating and it's always played out so well, whether it's, characters in any film or so I think like the Joker, the Joker film that came out recently in the years. It's great the way it's done in different ways. I'm just wondering, what do you think is the kind of equivalent in Tolkien? Is it Smeagol? Is Smeagol the trickster or is it somebody else?
I don't see Smeagol as the trickster. He doesn't have that same kind of like brilliance. You know who I actually see the most as the trickster in Tolkien? And this is a really beautiful intersection of archetypal principles, is Gandalf. It's Gandalf who also very much carries that wise old man archetype. He's the fool. He is the one who dies and is reborn. I mean, is that more of a trickster move? He is the most, he even says that don't take me for a conjurer of cheap tricks. He very much pairs the Senex and Puer archetypes in one being. So I really see Gandalf as that trickster in the Lord of the Rings, and in some ways something a little bit more abstract that's present there as well. If you read Tolkien closely, you'll notice that the word chance is never used lightly. They say, oh, a chance meeting, as we say in Middle Earth. And chance never means chance. It means synchronicity. It means there's a divine orchestration here. I'll allude to this. So if some of you aren't familiar with the story and after today you're thinking, oh, I want to go read The Lord of the Rings, I'm not going to ruin it for you. But what unfolds at the struggle of Mount Doom, that is the ultimate chance. That is the ultimate trickster moment, but it's beyond any of the individual characters.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Mike, Sari, Lou, Franklin, and Jade. Mike, I'll give you 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you. Considering David Bloom and several other synchronicity thing about the Red Book, there's another story that's a linkage that may be at least partially apocryphal, but largely historical. There was this guy, Wolfgang Pauli, who went through a crisis in about the same before the Red Book was written, and he went through a divorce, and his mother committed suicide, and he descended into the depths of alcoholism. And since they were both famous, they came together, and Jung cured him of his alcoholism, or at least gave him the point where he could do it. Now, Wolfgang Pauli is the guy who invented the surreal acausal world of quantum mechanics. Now, that led to the Red Book which wasn't published until way after Jung's death. But Pauli published a Red Book in the 20s, and that Red Book defined some of the weirdness and mystery of quantum mechanics and how it related to consciousness and a soul and his concept of what God might have been. So now the weirdness of Tolkien measures into the is largely a lot of that is borrowed. Middle Earth and synchronicity is borrowed from the acausal world of quantum mechanics and collective consciousness and things of that sort. So I've not seen this stuff documented, but the Pauli in physics circles, Pauli's connection to Jung is really accepted and has been discussed in many different dimensions by people like Feynman and Einstein and others. So I yield the balance of my time, and I didn't quite use my 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mike.
G. Grant, can I jump in for 10
Please.
seconds?
Please.
So Mike just triggered a very interesting memory. So the Red Book was also Alcoholic Anonymous, which Jung had huge influence on, one of the founders of that. That's also called the Red Book, and it's about transformation. So just when Mike was talking about Pauli and his alcoholism, I just wanted to throw out there's many Red Book spin-offs at that time, which are fascinating. That's
wonderful.
Yeah, Bill Smith at AA credited Jung for a lot of his ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Becca, would you like to comment on it?
I mean, I think that in terms of Pauli and many of the other scientists working in the realm of quantum physics, that is the avenue where we can best bring the scientific perspective into dialogue with this psychological, and whether it's Tolkien speaking from a more mythological place, or Jung from a psychological place, or Pauli from a scientific place, they're all describing the same thing and trying to find language for it and trying to bridge back between worlds. There is a splitting that took place within the Western intellectual tradition, at least, between all of these different realms, and yet bringing them back together is very much, I think, the work that we're called to do in this time. And so something that I find quite fascinating is that even though in science we went through the quantum physics revolution, that didn't really shift how those scientists lived their lives. How do you live in a world and a worldview informed by quantum physics? And that's something that's still being worked out, but I actually think we have to look elsewhere really for those answers to really integrate it. I think a lot of scientists are still living in a Newtonian Cartesian world, and that's a leap that hasn't been made yet. Something I'm often asked, because I'm an astrologer, is, well, how would you have this? How could you prove that scientifically? And the thing is, science itself would have to the scientific worldview would have to broaden and shift and change to account for that interiority. And the closest we get to that is with the new paradigm sciences, whether that's what, Rupert Sheldrake or Fritjof Capra or David Bohm or many others are bringing forward. These are the realms of science that would most need to be drawn upon in order to bridge between those disciplines.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Sari, Lou, and Franklin. Sorry.
If I may jump in with one other thought, perhaps.
Very quick, though. Go ahead.
Very quick. In terms of Becca's history, is Ken Wilber somewhat involved in advising some of this stuff to you?
I haven't delved too deeply into Wilbur's work, although I feel like a lot of the thinkers that have really informed me are Wilbur adjacent, like Stanislav Grof and Jorge Ferrer. Jorge Ferrer's work has had a huge influence on me, and he brought forward a revisioning both of the transpersonal theory articulated by Stanislav Grof and Ken Wilber. But for me personally, I'm not so much within Wilbur's lineage.
Thank you. And thank you, Mike, for everything, for being a kind of resident historian here. And we have to do a meetup so that we can go down all the rabbit holes in one single meetup. Okay, and let's do that. Next up is going to be Sari, Lou, and Franklin. Sari, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this offering. A question that we had, which Franklin has just posted on the chat as well, is given the kind of similarities in the creative works of Jung and Tolkien, in looking at their natal charts, do we find kind of similar archetypal energies, or are there parallels?
So interestingly, their charts are fairly different. They were born 17 years apart. And actually, one of the common threads that I find quite fascinating, and this came up in the breakout group that I was in, is the time when Jung's Red Book period started and Tolkien's Book of Ishness period was happening, and he started writing the Tales of Middle-earth. There was this alignment of Uranus and Neptune, and Uranus-Neptune alignments tend to correlate with the sudden revelation of the imagination and fantasy, and kind of a breakthrough of radical mystical and spiritual experiences. So this was happening at that time. And what's fascinating is to see the parts of Jung's chart versus Tolkien's chart that alignment was touching, because it speaks to their differences. For Jung, that alignment crossed his sun, and the sun astrologically relates to the sense of self and identity, who we are as autonomous individuals. And so this kind of revelatory breakthrough and breakdown occurred for Jung in a very personal way. And so it led him on this path of wanting to understand what these visionary experiences meant for him as an individual. And it led him down the path of articulating individuation and the self. These are all very solar themes. For Tolkien, it was crossing his Venus. And Venus is the principle of art and beauty and poetry and love. And so instead of taking that more personal focus, for Tolkien, he made it the artistic expression in painting, drawing, poetry, his stories. So I find that difference to be quite fascinating. Interestingly, one common alignment that the two of them have, different configurations, but they both have this, is a Saturn-Pluto alignment. And that's the one that I articulated in the opening session. We're in a Saturn-Pluto period right now. That's the one that correlated with the world wars. Both of them carry that archetypal signature. And these are two men who really devoted their lives to understanding the nature of evil, to confronting the shadow. They both use the term shadow very explicitly in their works. And it's about facing that shadow and integrating it. So that is something, interestingly, that they both have in common.
Wonderful. Before we go to the next question, I just want to let you folks know that we've got an incredible meetup at 5 o'clock. Randolph Ness, who founded the field of evolutionary medicine, along with the amazing biologist George C. Williams. He's going to be here talking about the idea of how evolution shapes medicine, and about his new book, which is going to be about evolution and mental health. So this is opening up a new field completely, and it's a very profound book. So you're welcome to stay, and that starts at 5 o'clock. next up is going to be Lou, Franklin, and Jade. Lou.
Hello. I actually wasn't asking to do a question, but
it was an interesting question, Lou. Go ahead.
Well, Franklin asked it, and we just had it answered beautifully from Becca. But here's a little thought game. Gandalf's horse was Shadowfax. What would Jung's horse be named? Just think about it.
It seems like it should be the same name, right?
Could be. Could be. Anyway,
that's fun.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great. And I was just glancing at the chat, and I saw that Franklin suggested Saruman as a trickster figure, and I totally agree with that. That just kind of slipped my mind, but actually you can really see Gandalf and Saruman as two sides of like the negative and positive trickster expression, and you can see a lot of that very strongly carried in the character of Saruman. In astrology, the trickster is associated with the planet Uranus, and Uranus is also associated with technology and innovation. And Saruman is by far the most modern character in The Lord of the Rings. The way he speaks, much more modern dialect than everyone else. It's very political. It's very slippery, very much the negative trickster who is oriented toward technology. He is the industrial revolution of Middle Earth. Revolution also being another Uranian trickster term. So Franklin, thanks for bringing that up.
Next up is Franklin. Go ahead, Franklin.
Perfect.
Becca, this is so nice to see you and absolutely brilliant. So many questions. In The Lament of the Dead, James Hillman and Sanu Shamdasani seem to be raising the question as to how do the dead speak? Are they speaking through literature? Are they speaking from the astral world? Like they actually, I think, ask the question, is there death? Like where is the intelligence dwelling? That we can go into books and communicate with Empedocles and Parmenides and ancient philosophers, and their intelligence is as alive as it was the day they wrote it down. And I want to compare that to Aragorn going under the mountain and giving the dead an opportunity to rest in peace if they will come and defeat the enemy that they failed in their incarnation. And do you have any, or just riff on that, I guess, like this question of the dead, because our modern rational paradigm has so deflated what to all the ancient cultures was the central theme. Like the dead was really the pillar at the center of civilization, was honoring the dead. And we've just really, like, so much dropped the ball.
Yeah.
But I think Tolkien was helping to reestablish it. And I think Jung was helping to reestablish it. Maybe you would riff on that a little bit.
Sure. This is one of the beautiful parallels between the Red Books, that Jung has his encounter with the host of the dead, the unredeemed dead, that we've come back from Jerusalem and having not found what we sought. And then Tolkien also has his host of the dead that Aragorn encounters. And the common theme is not only are these hosts of the dead, but they are the restless dead. They are the dead who have not accepted that they have died. And that that relationship to the dead is very much one based in fear. And so what Aragorn's role and what Jung's role is to, in some sense, usher the dead to the beyond. Let go of this realm, move beyond life, accept death. And I'm speaking from within, American culture. find very much here that there's such an intense fear of death, denial of death. We cannot sit with the bodies of our dead. We preserve the bodies in formaldehyde and bury them in concrete. We are so afraid of death and giving back to the whole, becoming one with the whole again.
And say something about when Elbereth goes before Mandos for Beren when he's died, and what does Mandos tell her? That death is the one gift that cannot be denied.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because it's horrible. It's
in Tolkien's cosmology, death is referred to as the gift of Iluvatar, the gift of God. It is something that is given to human beings, to mortals, as a gift, which is different from the so-called immortal elves who are bound to this world for the duration of their lifetime, which can start to feel like a doom and a curse. And so I think that really so much at the core of this and what's at the heart of Jung's Red Book and Tolkien's Red Book, this redemption of the dead, it is about accepting death as a part of life and recognizing the beauty of death. And when we can walk toward death, I don't want to say without fear, but with acceptance of that fear, we find that threshold, that fear is but a veil. And when we pass through, there's love on the other side. And that's what the redemption of the dead is really about. And I think that's what Jung and Tolkien in their different ways are trying to bring forward. You know, Aragorn is the kingly redeemer of the dead, and when it comes to be his time to die, he goes into it willingly and consciously. That is the true gift, not to fight or hold on till the end, but to say, it's my time to leave this body and move on to the next.
Wonderful. I have a question for you. So one of the things that you said that really caught my attention was that in our culture, we demean imagination, demean visions. You know, you're saying, oh, it's only a dream. You know, oh, that's only in your imagination. But when you look at the Red Book, you can see that this is really the core of the greatest thing that Jung had in him. And everything else that he did afterwards was kind of explicating it. So it had, you know, so that is the role, that is the place of imagination in human beings. What do you think, you know, when you look at people around us who demean imaginations, who are ashamed of their imagination, the core things that they should be most proud of, what recommendations do you have for them? How do you do this?
It's, you know, we see in children that imagination is so alive. We come in with imagination, and we have created a culture, a schooling system that really beats that out of people. Now, why would we do that? Because if you have a connection to the imagination, you have a connection to soul. And if you have a connection to soul, you have a connection to the entire cosmos. You understand that you are part of a greater whole. And if you understand that, you can't be controlled by powers above you. So I think that culturally we beat the imagination and we beat intuition out of children in order to control people. Now, I'm not saying this in some kind of top-down conspiracy way. I think it's much more pervasive than that. But if your imagination is alive and well and you feel interconnected with the cosmos, you don't want to spend your entire life working for the capitalist machine. You just don't. And you want to follow creativity. You want to follow the world of dreams. You want to change things for the better. And so the degradation of the imagination is very much to disconnect us from that and really to keep us as cogs in a wheel. So I would say that really being able to, you bring forward a really important point about shame. People are often ashamed of the imagination and their fantasies and their visions and their dreams. And what is so often said about shame, we bring it to light, we share it, we bring it forward in community. And shame cannot survive when it's brought under the bright light of compassion and community and relationship. So share your visions and share your dreams, share your imagination, affirm for others that it's real. Tell your stories, listen to other stories. This is how we do this. And we can reclaim this birthright that is ours as the cosmos in human form. So that's what I would say to that.
Beautifully put. Thank you.
Can I add something to that, Shrikant and Becca?
Please.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
For a minute. Something that strikes me is that, okay, ontogenetically, right? Ontogenetically, as it relates to phylogenetically, the evolution of consciousness has been a massive effort, a massive progressive effort to come from this sort of participation mystique, oneness of totality without differentiation. It's been a massive earned effort for the ego to take its stance against the other, psychologically speaking. So imagination, I think, could be perceived of as this dual thing. It's like on the one hand, there's a fear, right? Because it brings us back out of reality, right? There's a regressive pull back into a regressive womb state. It can take us out of the earned foothold of a conscious ego that can have willpower and can make decisions and be in the world where I make a living and I agree to have a job and an identity and I choose a partner and I commit. These are sort of ego choices. So the imagination plays this dual role of the regressive, understandably afraid of point where we say I have to protect myself from regressing back to this place where I'm not in charge, where I don't make decisions, where I don't have a foothold in reality. So there's a danger, there's a true danger about what I would conceive of as the imagination. On the other hand, there's this wonderful side, which I think Becca is describing, this amazing progressive dimension of being, through an ego reality-based standpoint, having a relationship to the archetypal and the spiritual and the oneness that's on the other side of being an individual. So it's interesting to say there's like a progressive versus a regressive potentiality in the imagination. It makes sense to be afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can find a foothold in a conscious ego with an identity, with a quote unquote adapted normal orientation, it can lead to some wonderful, magical things, which we see with Tolkien and Jung, I would say.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I mean, I think it's the question of openness and security.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can see that in a child, okay? I mean, we had a presentation yesterday about education, and this person who runs the school was saying that kids come in to the school full of curiosity. You know, they see a bug and they will spend 45 minutes just enthralled by it. But by the time most kids reach third grade, that is completely beaten out of them. Okay, what happens? So if you look at that kid, right, they have two things. A healthy kid, there is an openness. At the same time, they feel secure. That security of feeling that, okay, I'm secure. So it's like one foot in order and one foot in chaos, where you're continuously approaching, continuously being open to chaos, at the same time maintaining this one foot in order. So you have a place, I mean, in Indian terminology, there is a poet who says, you know, a human being, just like a bird, needs a nest and the sky. You need both. So that's beautifully put. Next up is Sue Tang. Go ahead, Sue.
Hi, Becca. Thanks for very nice presentation. I just have some of my own thought that I want to share. So I'm actually like a scientifically trained scientist who is working on a scientific job. And I think people might have this impression that the science is, like you described, this science is still working in the way there's a Newtonian. Everything is linear. There has to be clear causality, that word, between first thing and second thing. But there's actually many scientists who are using their vision, or what we call here imagination, to work through their problem. For example, sometimes at work, I have a scientific problem. I don't try to look what I'm looking for, but actually I go and listen to the problem, see what it's going to show to me. And usually it works out better than if you are trying to actually put the answer to the problem. And so I call it actually the kind of intuition where the working, you are seeking the answer, you are not fabricating it. I think that the problem of this way of working is too high risk. It's so risky. Like I think Franklin also said in our discussion that intuition is full of delusion, deception, and all kinds of stuff that's there to confuse you. It's never only like one single pure truth in front of you. Just say, yeah, this is it, take it. And the modern world, like this industrial world, actually doesn't tolerate something that actually has such a high chance of error prone. Like if they don't want to rely on intuition anymore. I think in the past time, 18th century, 19th century, those famous scientists, they had the time to actually like use their vision to think of what's the internal meaning of the science. While it's today in academia and industry, we don't have the time. We don't have the, we cannot lose our career. And that's kind of a reason why, I think it's also kind of a reason why our science is not progressing as fast as in the past. Because we are now so much pushed by this, let's call it capitalism, but I'm not sure. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you so much for bringing that forward and sharing your personal experience too. It's you're highlighting something that's so important that often gets left out of the scientific story. And I say scientific story rather than actual history of science, where intuition and imagination are such an essential part, whether it's you know, the LSD experience that stands behind finding the double helix of DNA, or the dream of the benzene ring. I mean, the whole scientific revolution was a spiritual pursuit to understand, to better understand the mind of God, to solve the problem of the planets and understand why we saw them move retrograde against the fixed stars. And that leads to the heliocentric revolution. So it's how we tell the story. And so I really appreciate how you brought that forward, that imagination, intuition are essential to that scientific endeavor, as you're saying.
All right, folks, this is fantastic. Becca, this was wonderful presentation. And let me go ahead and give you and Aiden the chance to make any closing remarks you would like to make.
I'll leave it to you, Becca. I just want to say thanks for coming and for spending this much time with us. It's really a pleasure.
It was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much for your comments and your questions and your insights and your listening and space holding. It's such a delight to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, Becca and Aiden, again, thank you very much. And we're going to be doing another of these 2 weeks from now on Practical Jung series. And we have the meetup coming up in about 26 minutes on evolutionary basis of mental health issues. So you're welcome.
Can I announce the Practical Jung now that we've decided on it?
Oh, like wonderful. Go ahead.
David and George, this is an update. They'll know about this idea, but the intention is to present on my octopus teacher which is a documentary film, as an incredible and accidental representation of the psychology of the urge towards wholeness. So Jung's idea of the urge towards wholeness is represented in this film, My Octopus Teacher, and I'm going to try to lay that case and how wonderful and automatic wholeness can sort of come to us.
Just a second, we should find, can you go ahead and find a link to that? And let's put it in there. So let me ask you a couple of things about it, Aiden, just to get people more excited about it. So why did you, what about this film caught your attention that you wanted to show, you want to choose this as a film to look at?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as I watched it, I myself am certified in Myers-Briggs, right, and MBTI, but I consider myself a Jungian, so I'm deeply invested in the analytical psychology point of view. All that to say, when I watched that film, I started to think, oh my gosh, here's a person who's a thinking type, who's getting in touch with his feeling function. Because in the course of the film, and I'll make this case, you see where he uses intuition. He's following hunches throughout the film. You see where he's using sensing function, because he is just so meticulous about the mapping and about like the way he collects facts. He's got this massive sensation function. He's got this massive intuition function. And you can see his life has come to a standstill as a thinking type. His life is no longer working as he knows it as a video editor and filmmaker. He says, I never want to see an editing suite again. I never want to touch a camera. His relationships were falling apart. And what did he do? He went back to his childhood love. Just like Jung with the building of the rocks, he went back to the ocean. And in his experience in the ocean, you see a man, a thinking type, in midlife, getting in touch with his feeling function. I mean, this is individuation.
Wow. That's amazing. All right. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you very much, everybody. We will take a short break and we'll be back